going. Here we go. Okay, it looks like we're live. Well, hey, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Patrick Millikin from the Poison Pen Bookstore in Scottsdale, Arizona. And it is my real treat and honor to welcome our good friend, longtime friend, James Lee Burke, back to our little program here. And we're going to be discussing his beautiful new book, Every Cloak Rolled in Blood. Just welcome, Jim. It's always great to see you.
Well, thank you for having me on your show and in your shop once again.
Yeah. I was just joking because I've seen on some of these programs, Jim, you'll be either upstairs in your nice, beautiful office, or you'll be down where the old people hang out. To use the language from your book, down in the basement.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I figured, as usual, we would just have ourselves a good conversation. There's a lot in this book that is very personal and meaningful, as it is in all of your work. But we'll get into the book, and I want to be very careful not to give away too many spoilers, although it's really not that kind of a book. And I thought we'd talk about guitars and music, and I'll probably ask you about John Neihart at some point. So I figured we just kind of go all over the place. And does that sound good?
Yes,
and for
sir.
you good people watching, if you have questions for Jim, I'm kind of flying solo here today. But if you want to go ahead and put them in on the comments field on YouTube or Facebook, go ahead, and sometime towards the end of the hour, I will go ahead and try to scan for some of those questions. But I don't know, Jim, I think a good place to start maybe is all of your books that I've read, it seems to me have some sort of classical antecedent. And in this case, can you talk about sort of what inspired this particular book?
Well, many things. I think I've mentioned in another interview that there are about 5 themes that are in the book. Some are historical or generated by historical events. Some are contemporary, some are personal. But all my work, since I wrote my first novel, Half of Paradise, in 1963, have had the same elements. I've never changed them. But now I've published 40 novels and 2 collections of stories, but I have never changed the subject. And you're correct. The situations are often classical. They're out of medieval era, the Elizabethan stage, and the Greek Golden Age, the 4 centuries before Christ, the Homeric era. But they are the stuff of, biblical material. I hate to admit that I'm so low rent I would steal from the Bible.
You're not the first.
But I use the Genesis is in this book. Genesis 19, Genesis 1, verse 19 to 29. It's in there. I'm afraid if I get upstairs that someone is going to say, we've been waiting for you.
And also, we'll just bring it out on the table. You mentioned it very early in the book. You had suffered quite a significant loss. One of your daughters passed back in 2020. And, this features prominently in the book, this a meditation on loss. And, I was fortunate enough to know Pomelo a little bit, and I was telling Jim before, and the rest of the family, Alifair is a good friend as well. And I was telling Jim before we got started, through reading this beautiful book, I really feel like I know her much, much better. So just a compliment.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, the fictional character in the book is undoubtedly based on Pomelo. Fannie Mae, whom we meet, is very much like Pomelo.
And we were talking just to give you folks a little taste. Very much of an animal lover, and there are some wonderful details in the book about how she would craft these little, like in the water stock, water things. She would put little
Water tank.
Yeah, exactly.
Tank. Yeah.
Is that a real factual detail? Would she do that?
Well, she was always involved with animals, always. And the stories I tell in the book, the letter I wrote also went with the earlier copies of the book about Pamelo's husbandry. Her home was unbelievable. She brought goats into the home. The story is true about she hired this cleaning service. These people had industrial strength machines, and they burned up the engines and the rubber what do you call them? Golly, belts in there. Pops when they what. Because of the hair that was clogged up inside the machinery and the pipes. Anyway, a friend of hers who was a guest overnight said, Pamela, waking up at your house is like waking up inside a hairball. And her cats left seat smears all over the tables. They walked on everything. But the goats, her two goats named Okie and Dokie, she'd bring into the house. And these dogs that were as big as small cars with all this is Montana. So in spring, it'd be like haystacks of hair all over the house. It was incredible. Those not exaggeration. You couldn't clean the place with the fire hose.
Wow. Just had drifts of hair everywhere. Yeah.
Well, anyway, Pamela was dedicated to animals. Oh, geez, she had great animals too. Yeah, we have a ranch, and in fact, it was through Pomelo we got our property. We have 120 acres, and we're surrounded by mountains. You cannot see another structure other than our own. But it's a retreat, a reservoir for all animals. We don't allow hunters on it, and we have three pastures, 2 barns, and 3 stock tanks. So we get all kinds of critters all the time. We have wolves. They're not wanted. Throw a pine cone at them and run, but we wouldn't shoot them. But no hunting allowed, and all animals of any kind. We joined the horse rescue program, and anyway, Pamela had a great deal to do with all that.
She even, or the character in the book, Fannie Mae, she even inspires our hero, Aaron Holland Broussard, to give up eating meat.
That's right.
Did that happen to you? Or?
Yeah, I'm a vegetarian.
All right, that's great.
Have been.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about, we can talk a little bit about sort of what kicks off the different strains that kick off this book. He's Broussard is, kind of reeling from this loss, and he comes outside and sees somebody spray painting a swastika on his barn door, and that sort of kicks the plot, as it were, off. Can we talk a little bit about the story and maybe the main players? and then we can get a little bit deeper into talking about Ruby Spotted Horse and all that.
Yes, sir. Anything you like. Mhm.
Yeah, can you tell us a little bit about the basic plot of the book?
Well, that's probably a compliment. I don't know that it has a plot, really. I've never been much on plots. Ernest Hemingway put it well. He said, if you know the plot, so will the reader. But it's more about our times. And that said, it is also about how the times in which we live today are reflections of some of the dark periods in our earlier history. For example, the Baker Massacre.
Right.
This was a massacre on the Marias River up in northern Montana. Beautiful piece of country. But it is probably the worst crime ever committed in the continental United States, worse than Wounded Knee. And it was not an aberration. It was part of what was a genocidal program that began right after the Civil War, the war between the states. And antecedent for that policy was, this is my perception though, Mr. William Sherman at work. Sherman declared war on civilians. He didn't go out, I suspect, and kill civilians, but I suspect some that happened. But it was, in other words, not an isolated incident, the Baker Massacre, nor was Sherman's policy. Sherman, after the war, was one of the advocates of destroying the entirety of the bison that were estimated to be 50 million head in number in the 1830s. At the end of the era, the closing of the West, 1892, the herd was 200 head. And the policy was developed for one reason only, to starve the Indians into surrender. It was worse than surrender, though. It's horrible what occurred. But how many people have ever heard of the Baker Massacre? Well, very few, because I don't think anyone can own up to it. What they did went even beyond genocide. I don't even talk about it.
And there's a scene in the book where your character has visions of what happened at that massacre.
That's right.
Yeah.
The narrator of the story, Aaron Holland Broussard, subscribes to a peculiar view about time. And he, as I and my father, believed that, or did believe that all events, all time happens not in a sequential fashion. It all is happening simultaneously. Though the unborn are already with us, the dead are with us. And none of this is demonstrable, but I think it makes more sense than trying to define time as a sequential element, because even Einstein said that there were certain problems in his conception, namely trying to define the edges of infinity. In other words, that ultimately there's some, I think he said that, and said physics has no help, or can give us no help. And I'm sorry, I ate a bunch of taco chips right before. interview.
Yeah, no, I was looking up. I have my book is all marked up with little passages about that. And there's a really beautiful one. I read it to my wife when I was reading it, where Broussard says, "I've long called myself a believer, but even to myself, I've never quite defined what I believe. I think the universe is infinite, but the terms infinity and eternity are abstractions that have no physical correlation." I love this. The possibility that matter can act as its own architect and create the human eye or brain strikes me as irrational. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
That's the great mystery, how anyone can believe that a swamp 7 million years ago decided to create creatures that could have eyes, think, turn into us. I'm not denying it, evolution, but obviously something else is going on. Two amoebas didn't decide to have a romance and then create all of the creatures and people that we see around us now.
Yeah. And there's that part where he says, "My father was the most intelligent man I ever knew. He used to say that science and art are nothing more than the incremental discovery of what already exists. He also believed that the material world is an extension of an unseen one." And I was going to ask you, and you've already partially answered that, but does that reflect your own father's worldview?
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell me more about him. I've heard a little bit in bits, but tell me about your dad.
Well, he was a very intelligent man, and as such, he was a lonely man. He was prescient, I think. He was a student of history, although he was a chemist and natural gas engineer. That's how he made his living. He despised the oil business. He just absolutely despised it. And he wanted to be a journalist and a writer, but it was during the Depression. You didn't quit your job. But as I say, he was often a lonely man. I will never forget 1940 to 1945 on VJ Day. My father invited a bunch of people over to the house, mixing mint juleps. And he didn't say much, though. And someone finally said, "Jimmy, well, what are your thoughts here about the future of the world?" And he said, "Well, this is my feeling. The Russians are now going to move." And he said, "They will not fight a war honestly. They will instead create wars of insurgency. They will use others, third world countries, and they will fight a war in which they try to bleed us to death, the death of 1,000 cuts." Then he said, "The great empires are gone, the French, the Spanish, and the British." And he said, then he said, "We will probably end up with only one foreign policy. It will be a return to the Monroe Doctrine." He said, "Our withdrawal from the role of an empire or a neo-colonial country will in effect take us into a time when ultimately we may be destroyed by ourselves." And people were just dumbfounded, right? And I'll never forget it. That's what he said. He said, actually what he said it was, "We will be undone by ourselves."
Wow.
Yeah.
So he had some literary aspirations himself. Did he ever write anything?
He did. He did quite a bit, but he never showed it to anybody. He wrote longhand, but he wrote very good prose. He's extremely intelligent, very wide read.
Did he live long enough to see your success as a writer?
No, he died as in an auto accident.
I see.
No, when I was 18.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know that. Yeah. Well, let's get into talking about Ruby Spotted Horse. Tell us about her. What a wonderful character.
Yeah. She's a great character. She's a state trooper. She's part Blackfoot and part Nez Perce. And she has some of the problems with society, with white society, that Indians still have today. And they do. They have the problem. I say it's the prejudice still there. No doubt about it. Pomelo and my son often have been mistaken for Indians and been treated badly as a consequence here in Montana.
Right. And so Broussard finds in Ruby Spotted Horse, who is dealing with the loss of her niece, a kindred spirit in some ways in this book. Is that accurate?
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's the intention. I mean, again, it's a work of fiction, but much of the material is, I didn't create it. I didn't create the situations. This is the way I've always written. The situation may be written down as a fictitious one, but nonetheless, had occurred in some fashion or another, that I saw it, or I know about it, or someone else whom I trust could vouch for whatever occurred. But this is the way I think about it. I've seen some things, and I know about things that I will never talk about to anyone. And I'll write about them, but I will never talk about them. And I know things that other people don't. And they're things that would sicken people. But I've seen I'm not going to talk about it. I'm not. Look, think of it this way. My father did not believe we descended from one tree, and I believe, as he did, that there's several families in the gene pool out there. How, why they got there, I don't know. But I do not believe we all think the same way, or we're all made in the same fashion. That there are people who are different, and they will do things that are seemingly beyond what anyone with any humanity at all would be capable of doing. So I saw early on in my life, I came to believe that there are people you can shake hands with them and you feel it. It's like a sense of like a black electricity climbing up your arm, and you know it to get away from this person. And they're around us all the time. And the bad ones, the really bad ones, are the ones that end up with power over us because we give it to them. We give it to them.
I thought you were going to say you shake their hands and you can feel the scales of the, yeah.
Well, there are people who are born with scales, the gills.
You remind me of
It's on people's neck, or it's the what look like the scars of from smallpox.
right.
Those are the remains of the scales, are the gills.
You talk a little bit in the book about the sin of slavery the aberrant social contract that was made, that informs the book in some ways. And one of the things that struck me though about your books is that I admire is that you seem to be, and I don't want to put words into your mouth, but you're a believer in second chances, sometimes third or fourth chances.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about a character in this book named Culpepper.
Yeah.
How does he function in this book? What's his role?
Well, there's a character who shows up from Alabama, from Birmingham, who was not only a Klansman, he was an officer. What is it? In the clavern, as they call it. But he's a man who bears a great burden, and for no reason at all, passing a black church years ago, he stuck his pistol out the window and fired into it and killed a child. And he's hidden this all of his life. And he confesses to our narrator, Aaron Holland Broussard. But he's one of those men who is a peculiar mentality. He lacks the education to have self-knowledge, and he is not aware that he's a construction of other people. And I'm reminded of the character in John Grisham's book, The Chamber. I didn't read the book, and I've read other works of his, but John Grisham. But the film was just stunning, and it starred Gene Hackman as the Klansman. And in the story, in the film, the convict, he's played by Gene Hackman, is about to be executed. And the warden comes to the cell and he says, I think, Bill, we're going to have to do it. Do you have anything you want to say? And Bill, Gene Hackman, says, yes, sir, there is. There's many a man in my life that I hated, but the one I hate the most is myself. Boy, what a line. John Grisham should have gotten a Pulitzer just for that line only, but that's it. He was taught to hate himself, and that's how it always worked down south. The man sitting up there on the hill, looking down on the cotton field, let's call him Whitey, always kept the black man, the black working man and the white working man at each other's throats. That's how it works. Always, everybody knows.
Wow. And was it perhaps a subtle nod to Hackman that you have a minor character in this book named Hackman? Do you remember that?
No, I don't. I have one in there named Hackman.
I think you do. Yeah, I think it may be a cop or somebody. He doesn't have much time on stage, but I might be wrong. I think
you're probably right. It's a great name. Gene Hackman gave me a blurb.
Did he really?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it ended up. I guess he's published 3 novels, and he made a comment on one of my books, and I guess with permission, the publisher put it on the jacket. I thought a great honor.
Yeah.
He's a great actor, golly Moses, and he's supposed to be a nice fellow as well.
Right. Again, I don't want to give away too much. There's just so much stuff in this book that I'd love to ask you about. Now, Ruby Spotted Horse, she lives in this decrepit old Victorian house. And I mean, it's fairly early in the book, Jim. So the basement, there's something very special about the basement, sort of almost a portal into another world where these people that you call the old people. And
Yeah.
who are they, and what are these spirits, and how do they work in the world?
Well, it's a portal, and I don't want to say too much about it, but it's a portal into what is worst in our past, and it's there. And suddenly, Aaron, our protagonist, sees it all at once, and it's more than he can deal with. In other words, he's watching that thousands and thousands of years of what has been our history. And think of it this way. We have been around how long? I mean, in a civilized fashion, maybe about 11,000 years, 11,000 years, when we started growing things and stopped migrating and throwing rocks at each other. We tried to start creating civil ways of handling problems. Well, in all that time, we look just right over our shoulder in the 20th century, and we have to accept the fact that we came very close, probably, to exterminating a even greater number of people than we did ourselves. Not, excuse me, but all right, let me go back to what my father said. We did not actually end World War II. We just changed the names. The issues are the same. You know who else said that? It was, Lawrence of Arabia, T.E. Lawrence. And he said in his great book, The Seven Pillars of Wisdom, the issue is minerals, petroleum and gas. It's the issue in 1915. It will be the issue in 2015. That's the issue. The same people, same players are there. We've just changed their names, except now we have a situation whereby that just a handful of men can make a decision that will incinerate the entire planet. And we're messing with it right now, in my opinion. We're right on the edge. Putin, Stalin, doesn't make any difference. The goal is the same. As my father said, the Russians don't fight an honest war. They find surrogates. They wear the other side down, and they're inured to pain. They proved that at the Battle of Stalingrad. We haven't changed. We haven't changed the players. We have not changed the issues. The issue in the Mideast has always been minerals, always. And secondly, the system of refineries, the pipelines that went through Afghanistan, for one reason only, to get the oil into India and Pakistan, rather than to have to go through Iran in it. Look, everybody in the oil business knows this. The issue is control of the spigot, the ability to turn it on and off. Drilling oil is easy, but you need precedent, you need the spigot, and that's what it's all about. It's been that way 100 years. Ask anybody in the oil business. They laugh at the rest of the world. Look, people, I don't want to say anymore. My father was in the oil business until his death. He died on the job in the oil business. Right? Okay, my mother worked 40 years for a driller. I was a landman for Standard Oil, for Sinclair Oil. They were wonderful to me. That's how I got through college. That's how I paid my way through college. I was also a pipeliner. I did small amount of drilling out on the Gulf, out on the water. And I did some, I forget what else I did. I was in and out. The grunts on the ground are the best people in the world. If they are afraid, I never saw it. And it's often dangerous. But anyway, the guys topside are another bunch. They are different. Hey, did you ever see the film The Formula with Marlon Brando? He plays this corrupt Texas oil man who has a friend named JR. And JR says to Marlon's character, you know, them damn Arabs are sure causing us a lot of trouble, ain't they? And Marlon says, son, haven't you figured it out? We are the damn Arabs. That's it. That's it, brother.
Wow.
And everybody in the oil business knows it. You think a bunch of guys that, you know, are still riding camels or calling the shots.
Yeah. Well, that was an incredibly dangerous job, too, right? I mean, people were dying all over the place doing that work, right?
You mean in the oil business? Well,
Yeah.
it's easy to get hurt. You can't daydream. I mean, but and people lose their lives, and, you know, blowouts, and it's like, I've seen a blowout, and my heavens, I don't know, it'd be 100 yards in the air, a flame coming out of the ground.
I did see that actually excellent film called There Will Be Blood, which was based upon Upton Sinclair's book Oil. Did you see that?
Oh yeah, you bet. That's quite a film.
That was great.
Yeah.
So the old people, kind of getting back to these spirits you were talking about. So they, if I'm understanding them correctly, they can manipulate good people by using their own virtues against them. Is that kind of roughly accurate?
Well, that's it. Yeah, unfortunately, it just seems to be a Darwinian gene in us, and I'm afraid that's often the case. I'm not a cynic. I know it sounds cynical, but what bothers me is our willingness to put aside the truth, and maybe it's even a virtue in us. We just don't want to believe that our fellow human beings can do things in such a willful way, knowing that they do great harm. What happened last week down there in Texas, I just think about it over and over. I just can't get it out of my head that we've allowed something like this to happen. Listen to the lies. The men who protect a very, very small number of people make a lot of money making certain kinds of guns. It's that simple.
Yeah.
It's that simple. This other stuff, these lies, and they are lies about the Second Amendment. We do not allow people to buy hand grenades or flamethrowers or machine guns. Why not? If we do these other things,
right.
If it's true, there should be no control. Why don't we really get it on? Let's really be serious about it. And go nuclear if you want. Well, of course, that would sound insane. Well, the AR-15, I own one. I'm a collector. I've owned and collected guns since World War II. And I have an extensive collection, in fact, but I do not hunt, and these are historical pieces, but I have an AR-15. I have an AK-47, I have an M1, I have a Thompson 45 with a 50 what do you call it, drum, 50 cartridge But the point is that these guns were made for only one reason: to kill people in large numbers as fast as you can in a confined environment. That's what they're made for. They're not made for sporting contests. I mean, shooting bottles or targets or hunting. None of those things. They are made to kill people. And all you have to do is get you can get these little kits that will turn some of those weapons into the same as a fully automatic gun, a machine gun. And the AR-15 is one of them with what's the name of the piece that goes on the shoulder? The fellow who killed all those people in Las Vegas, it was 69 people firing from.
Right.
That gun, that AR-15 was firing as fast as a fully automatic M16 rifle. But in other words, we're talking about one kind of gun that is used again and again and again, one that's very similar to it, but it is made to kill large numbers of people. That's what it's made for. And these men are standing up there behind a microphone in Houston, Texas, grinning in the same week as children were murdered like this with a weapon like that. It just turns my stomach.
It's an obscenity.
It's just absolutely sickening.
The counter argument.
Yeah.
I was going to say, and the counter argument that the solution is to arm teachers. I mean, good God.
Yeah.
It's obscene.
Well, the point is, if we wanted redress, if we really wanted to confront the problem, would we be talking about these other things? Well, don't we do everything that will work? Do this, do that. Put the crazy people in places where crazy people should go. Put people in the pen. But that's not the issue. This is not what they're talking about. They want that gun on the market, and they want people buying guns in large amounts. And many people don't go through this what do you call it? They don't have to jump over the 3-day, I think it's 30 or 29 day back
period. Right.
I shouldn't have gotten off all this. I apologize.
Not at all.
Those are just my feelings. And the lives of those people down there in Uvalde, Texas, who lost their children, their lives will be filled with pain until their deaths. And this is one theme in my book. And this is what it amounts to. This is not my perception. This is the perception of anyone who loses his child. It is the worst thing that can happen to any human being. Others will not understand it. They cannot understand the emotion, the level of psychic pain that it engenders. And a person, if he is to survive, the parent, if he is to survive and to put his life back together again, he will have to learn certain things, one of which he belongs to a special club. And it is one that only fellow members in it will understand or have empathy to what he is experiencing. Otherwise, it's like you hear bromides out there and people are trying to do their best, but you're in a very solitary place. And usually it's very hard to even keep your mind on what other people are saying around you. But this is what you aim at. You aim at living with a scar instead of an open wound. And that scar allows you to be a veteran of what psychiatrists call a Gethsemane syndrome. It is the same syndrome that Jesus experienced at Gethsemane when he knew he was going to die on the cross, and he literally sweated blood. That's what you do when you get into that level of desperation and unfortunately, what is the edge of perhaps suicide. All right, there are other things that happen as well, though. You lose all fear in your life. You can't care less about what the world does to you. If this is the message you tell yourself or you tell the world, break your fist on my face. You won't hurt me. And you never, never again look back over your shoulder. And you do what you can to help others. And you do what you can to get rid of the frauds in the world, the cheats who harm children, or just simply you try to, in some way or another, when you carve your name on, or somebody carves your name on your gravestone, you feel like you made a contribution to the human family. That's it. But the rest of your life, you've got to slip the punch because it comes back. We lost another child in 1963. It's just like yesterday. It is just like yesterday. It's still there, but you don't talk about it. And as I say, you just slip the punch, you shine them on, and you never let people hurt you. And that's it. That's it.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of the dark night of the soul that you were talking about within the private cathedral.
Mm-hmm.
In some ways.
Yeah, that's it. Dave Robichaux talks about it.
Yeah.
That's it. Sweat blood, brother.
Yeah. In this book, Broussard has some guides. You know, one being his daughter. You know, kind of guides him throughout the book. Do you have that sense yourself of kind of unseen hands appearing in your life to help and guide you along?
Yeah. I believe, I'm a believer, and I try to be a good Christian, and but I'm not sure what I believe in, but I'm sure of one thing, that there are things out there to believe in. I can't quite put my hand through the veil, but I've had one experience, unexplainable, and it involved Pomelo some years ago, when three men, Pomelo was, no question about it, she was able to see through that veil. And when she was 2 years old, we knew it, that she saw things, she knew things that just children at 2 don't know. But three men appeared to her in her bedroom, and she called me in the morning, and she told me she was crying. She was hysterical. And she said 3 men had come with a message for me. And she gave me, I said, first I said, sit down, just sit down, calm down, Pomelo. What did you see? And she gave me their names. And my knees caved in. And those 3 men were my 2 cousins and my uncle. And they were the people who were closest, I was closest to in my mother's family. That's the Holland family. Alifair Holland was my grandmother. They were pioneers and another extraordinary people. But they left her, Pomelo, with things to say, their nicknames and things about them that only I could know. She never met these people, you see, and they were from years ago. One of them was my cousin, Weldon Benbow Millett, and it's the main character really in my novel, Wayfaring Stranger, because his nickname was Buddy. And Buddy and Danny Benbow and my uncle Jimmy Brown Benbow, they said, tell your dad that he's going to be behind a truck and it's going to have a flatbed trailer on it, and it will look like it's carrying pipe, but that truck is going to kill your dad if he doesn't watch out for it. I said, geez, golly. And so I told Pamela, okay, Pamela, I'll keep this in mind. And 2 years passed. Pearl and I were coming over a mountain from British Alberta. And it was at sunset. And I saw this truck up ahead of me going uphill about 55 miles an hour, but it was in traffic. Then I said, oh my Lord, he was slipping his load. His boomer chain had slipped, but he wasn't carrying pipe. He was carrying lodgepole pines, and the back of the truck, they were causing these things, big logs, to bounce just like pipe would do. There was a pipe went past me. It looked like a snake coming at me, or a helicopter blade. And it missed. I swerved the car, and it missed the front of the car about 18 inches. And that was it. But if it had hit us, we probably would have been killed. Or
how old was Pomelo? How old was Pomelo at that time? Just a little girl?
Oh, she was, oh no, this was when she was about 40 or so.
4? Wow.
40 or so. Yeah.
Oh, 40. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. Even still.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I've heard you talk about, we're talking about these kind of guides and things. Do you think, I've heard you speak about your view of art, and where your writing comes from. Do you feel sometimes like you're just kind of taking dictation?
Well, I have a hard time remembering what I write. This is how the story works for me. I see some scene, see the first page of the paper, and then I start writing 2 scenes a day. I wake up with about 2 scenes, and I never know where the story is going. I don't know how it will end, not until I get to the very end, 2 or 3 pages. And that's the way it's always been. And I usually see the scenes in my sleep. And when I go back to the novel, a little time will pass. I don't recognize the prose. I don't recognize it as mine. I don't understand what's going on. That's someone called it my what was it? She was, I don't know, the savant. Fellows who are born with a gift, but it really was just lent to them. It's really humbling. Just feel you're walking down a street and you're suddenly imparted with something. You're the messenger, and somebody else is running your thoughts. But that's only, look, but I don't think I'm alone. William Faulkner said this right before his death. He said, had I not written the stories, so another hand would have done so for me. And Hemingway, right before his death, said to someone, it may have been his wife, he called her up. He called up Hadley the night before he died. He said he reread Old Man and the Sea, and it was as though someone else had written it. I mean, Ernest Hemingway was not a modest man when it came to talk about his work. I mean, he openly compared himself with Balzac.
Yeah, well, I wanted to ask you just a couple.
Can I say something?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, look, I want to apologize. I get a little emotional about some of those things that I'm really bothered by the death of all those children.
Not at all.
It's happened so many times. And I don't have all the answers. I don't. And maybe I have no answers. But what troubles me, what really troubles me, is that we have allowed people who, for financial gain, have used the Constitution, they have used their political office to lie over and over and over again. They lie shamelessly. And we've allowed that to happen to our country. And I don't think it bodes well for us in other areas. And I don't care what anyone says. This country is not the same one I was born into. I believe that I belong to the last generation that we will call traditional America. We are not the same people who in 1945 had atomic weapons, and instead of punishing our enemies, we rebuilt them in Germany and Japan and Italy. No nation in the history of the world has acted with such a magnanimity and charity as the United States did in 1945. We could have turned the world into a slave camp with concertina wire and electric lights and the ovens. We could have turned the world into a nightmare. Instead, we took on our behalf the rebuilding of the people who would have done terrible things to us had the war gone the other way. How in God's name did we come from there to a government that we have like we have elected in the last, 20 years? But how did we put these men in control over us? It really frightens me. That's it. It's not them. It is what we have allowed them to do. And that's what bothers me. It's about my children, my grandchildren, and I think, and as we all do, why are we allowing this to happen? And these men have no other reason for allowing the empowerment of people who are obviously deranged. And then in the aftermath saying that, well, we're just going to go out and cure crazy people and don't worry about the guns, right, even though there's no way to sort any of it. It makes no sense. I mean, no. Actually, even talking about the irrational things that are offered up as some kind of surrogate for just being honest and saying, look, great, got guns, you want to be a hunter, want self-protection, give special licenses perhaps to some people who want to buy museum pieces. Great, right, do all those things. Let's just do it in a sensible way, and let's get our country back. I mean,
it just seems like common sense.
Yeah, I think so. And it's a great country. Good Lord, think about it. Every country in the world wants to be like us.
Yeah,
that's it. Rock and roll. Elvis Presley, Coca-Cola, Dairy Queen, Big Macs, Levi jeans, my heavens.
Right.
So what they want, why do we have to fear? What do we have to fear from people who want to emulate us?
Before we sign off, and I'll take a look at some of the questions that come in. I wanted to ask you a little bit about, I'm not even sure if I have a question formed, but I said at the beginning of the hour that I was going to probably ask you about John Neihardt, and I'm going to have to do that because in this book, the Nez Perce and Chief Joseph and that whole Exodus attempt to get to Canadian border figures prominently in this book. And I get the sense, hearing you talk about Neihardt before, just that connection within living memory between today and that era, the end of the frontier era. It just seems like it's just a second ago. Can you talk about Neihardt and his influence upon you?
Yeah, that was Dr. John Neihardt, and he was my first poetry creative writing professor at the University of Missouri in 1957. And he was a great gentleman, and he wrote Black Elk Speaks, and he was a mystic himself. He was just a grand gentleman, and he helped me with my writing. I was only 20 years old, and he gave me great encouragement. And he told me, he said, Jim, you're going to be a great writer one day. But then he said, he said, he said, a gift that was like a handful of diamonds and rubies rolled across the top of a table, but I didn't have a frame for them. He said, you have to learn form. You have to learn form. He was really big on form. We had to learn how to write the Petrarchan sonnet, the Elizabethan sonnet, Shakespearean sonnet. She started us with, iambic pentameter.
Right.
Yeah. He was a mystic, and strange things happened at his ranch and farm. I mean, his wife communicated with him after she was killed in an auto accident, but I knew him well. And in one of my books, I think it was in the House of the Rising Sun, which is about the American West, I dedicated the book to the memory of John Neihardt and A.B. Guthrie, who there would be no American West were it not for these two men. They're the ones who saw what really was occurring. And it was the replication of civilization being built, the early man following the sun westward, all the way to California. But the American story is one that's filled with grief. And both of those men knew that. They knew that something wonderful went on for about 40 years, but we manifest this destiny and this notion of conquering the wilderness. She was, you don't conquer your mother.
Yeah. Did you know, I'm sure you did. I'm not sure if I've ever asked you about this, but did you know James Welch, Jim Welch?
Yeah, no Jim, many years, sure.
Yeah.
He and Lois.
Yeah, he's one of my favorite novelists and poets. If anybody watching, I hate to hijack this, Jim, to talk about another writer, but he would you agree? Fool's Crow and some of those books.
Fool's Crow is one of the best novels written about Native Americans.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And The Death of Jim Loney, which I always thought was his noir novel.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, fantastic writer.
Yeah.
But
A.B. Guthrie's book, The Big Sky, I rate it with Ulysses. It's just one of the best books ever written in the English language. Why he does not get the praise that he earned, gee whiz. And his other great book was The Way West.
The Way West, but right.
The Big Sky is just, boy, it is just, you just read it over and over and over. It's a sonnet.
Now, you mentioned before we got started here live that you had finished a new book. Is there anything you can say about it?
Yeah, kind of 2 hours.
Yeah, we do,
No,
actually.
no. That its title is The Mysterious Obsession of Hannah Laveau. And it's set in Louisiana during the Civil War, years 1862 and 63. It is a great book. I have to say it. Good heavens. This is, oh, I'm really proud of it.
Wow.
I have a bias, I guess.
Now you've
It's a
written
great
about that period before with the white doves at morning. Is there any kind of
Yeah,
inter thread with that story?
yeah, yeah. It's after Shiloh. Shiloh was a meat grinder. And, well, you know, F. Scott Fitzgerald said something I never forgot. You cannot understand America unless you understand the graves of Shiloh. Well, what a line. It still sends chills through me. God, my great uncle was William Burke. We call him Uncle Willie in the family. But he went up the slopes there at Owl Creek. That was on Beauregard's left flank. And they got deserted up there. They were enfiladed. And 50, let's see, golly Moses, in 15 minutes, 40% of his regiment were casualties. But Shiloh was, there were 23,000 wounded and killed in 3 days. You know, but the whole world was shocked that Americans could do this to each other. And no, I mean, it frightened even the officers on both sides. First and Second Manassas was nothing compared to what happened at Shiloh.
Yeah, those numbers, those casualties, it's just staggering to think about.
Oh, geez.
Yeah.
And at, my great grandfather went up Cemetery Ridge, and in 40 minutes, there were 8,000 men either dead or wounded on the ground. 40 minutes. And they had wool uniforms, you know, so, in 95-degree heat. You know, it's just hard to imagine. You know, Lee at Malvern Hill sent 50,000 men uphill into Canada.
Did you ever meet Shelby Foote?
No, but I sure wish I could. I could. Gee, I could have. Golly, boy, his
You read
books.
those?
His books.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're like literary novels rather than history.
Yeah, you
Boy,
finish
could he
them and
write.
you think you feel like you've lost a friend when you finish reading the books. Really.
That's it. That's it.
Let me
Walter
see.
Percy was his good. Excuse me.
That's right. His good friend. Let me just look at some of these questions that have come in.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, can we answer those?
Yeah,
please?
I apologize. Don't mean to
Yeah.
dominate it. A lot of them are just saying how much they like your books and what a personal connection they have. David says, I lost my son in 2009 and my wife was my savior. I wish I could have the conversation that Broussard has with Fannie Mae.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Well, please accept my condolences, sir. And I know what it's like. And you're a good person, and I bet your son's listening to you right now.
Let's see here. Yeah, Steve, a friend of mine, he just says, you know, hey, Jim, this is a beautiful piece of work. He read the book early on too. And he says, will there be more with the Holland clan? You've been writing about them from almost the very beginning, haven't you?
Yeah, I have. I don't know what's coming next. I just finished the Civil War book. So I don't know what's coming next.
All right. Let's see here. Jim, I think most of these others are just people saying how much they love your work and how inspirational you are. Let's see here. Stefania, this is interesting. Stefania, who's one of our viewers from Italy, she's been tuning in a lot. And she says, what type of America do you want to show through your books? Do our roots help to let us know where we are going?
Well, I go back again to this, what occurred in 1945, that what the United States did when it rebuilt its enemies, the countries of our enemies. Brendan Behan, you remember the Irish writer,
oh, yeah.
and also who's in the IRA. He tried to blow up. Yeah, Borstal Boy, that's right. He tried to blow up the George VI battleship when he was 16 years old. Talk about, I saw him once. I don't want to get into all this.
Did you really?
Okay. Yeah, oh yeah, in London. I was in London, and I had went down to Piccadilly. Is that where the
Piccadilly Circus? Yeah.
The theaters are. Anyway, his play, The Choir Fellow,
right,
was playing there that night. And in the middle of the play, there was all this talk and noise, and some drunk disturbing the whole auditorium. They had to turn on the lights. It was Brendan Behan.
Of course it was.
And then he told the audience he needed a drink and he didn't have any money, and he passed the hat for himself. Okay. The next day, I was in the tubes. He was standing there on the walkway, and I thought, black Irish are. I mean, you have black hair, fists the size of
kind of like a Cleat Purcell.
Yeah, Cleat Purcell. Anyway, but golly, I thought that if I asked, I was going to introduce myself, I said, this fellow, then I thought, he's got to have a hangover and he's going to throw me on the third rail. But he said something in a Time interview I never forgot. He said, those who hate America hate mankind. And this is an Irishman who, pretty tough guy, but I thought that was just a really great statement.
Wow.
I have never forgotten that. The person who hates America hates humanity.
Wow. Yeah. No, he was a wonderful writer. Borstal Boy, and there was The Choir Fellow and maybe one other play that he did. But he also had lots of great quotes. Another one I remember was every cripple has his own way of walking. That was a Brendan Behan quote.
Well, he was quite a fellow.
Yeah. But anyway, we digress. It's always a real treat to talk with you, Jim. Thanks so much. It's been a great hour. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, sir, and Barbara, and all the people out there. And look, I tell you the truth, I got up kind of really early today and take care of a bunch of things in the garden. And anyway,
not at all.
Okay. Anyway, y'all are great and very patient bunch, and so
it's all from the heart, Jim.
It's an honor to be among you.
Have you been playing the guitar at all?
Yeah, I play every day.
Do you?
I hear doors slamming all over the house. I don't know what that means, so.
All right. We'll take good care, my friend, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks again.
Thanks, everybody.